Hello, book lovers, and welcome to the 115th episode of Authors Love Bookstores from a Mighty Blaze. I am your host, Joe Moldover, and I am so happy to be back here with you today. Every week, I journey across North America with my partner and co-host, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence, to visit independent bookstores and the authors who love them. And this week, we are in San Francisco, California, at Fabulosa Books. We are visiting with National Book Award winning author Malinda Lo and independent bookseller Melissa Richmond. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for being here.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Melissa.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
We're delighted to have you. Let me introduce you to the audience. Malinda Lo is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 novels, including most recently A Scatter of Light, seen here. Her last novel, Last Night at the Telegraph Club, won the National Book Award, the Stonewall Book Award, the Asian Pacific American Award for Literature, a Michael L. Prince Honor, and was an LA Times Book Prize finalist. She lives in Massachusetts with her wife and their dog. And we are also joined by Melissa Richmond. As I said, Melissa has over 35 years of experience in independent book selling, and 2 years came to work at Fabulosa Books on Castro Street in San Francisco. At that time, it was known as Dog-Eared Castro. We will have some questions about that for you. In addition to book selling, Melissa is a writer and a poet and lives in San Francisco with her wife and their cat, Lucky. Melissa, welcome to you. Malinda, I'm going to start off with you. We are so fortunate to be here today because you selected Fabulosa Books as a bookstore, independent bookstore that you love and that you want to support. And I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about why. What is so great about them?
Well, I only heard about them because they emailed me a couple of months ago. Melissa emailed me to say hello and to introduce themselves because I no longer live in San Francisco. I lived there for 15 years, but I moved to just outside of Boston in the last 5 years. So I'm no longer there. But I remembered when the Castro had an LGBT-focused bookstore called A Different Light. And A Different Light closed at some point. Melissa probably knows better when. And it was very sad because there was this time when all these LGBT bookstores were closing across the country. But in the last couple of years, I've seen them start to return. And Fabulosa Books was one of them. And they are in the same location as A Different Light, which I found to be really wonderful. And I actually had the chance to visit in person last week when I was on my book tour, and it's exactly the same space. It feels so great to be in there, and there's so many more books now that are LGBT and than there were when A Different Light was there. So it's just, I'm so excited to support this bookstore.
That's great. I love that. Melissa, I wonder if you would tell us a little bit more about the store. It has an interesting history. The name has a fascinating backstory. You were Dog-Eared Books until I believe last year. Tell us a little bit about the store, its mission, and the name.
Well, we were lucky enough to go into the space that was previously occupied by A Different Light in about 6 years ago. And as times moved on, the owner of it went into the store. We went into that space as Dog-Eared Castro. We were owned by the same woman who owns Dog-Eared on Valencia, a very, very good store that's been there for, I think, 30 years now. And it was kind of preordained, I think, that Alvin, who was the founding manager, who worked for the owner, Kate, for decades, would eventually take this store over himself. And that transition was completed about a year ago, last September. And so it's been a new adventure watching Alvin, take flight with his own bookstore and, constantly struggle with how to make the bookstore better and better or more fabulous. And and kind of pivot as you have to in the book business, depending on what people want and what people are looking for, and kind of how to stay nimble as a business in kind of a very interesting climate in San Francisco.
That's great. Will you tell us a little bit about the name?
The name comes from the Polari language, which is a kind of gay subcultural language that was prevalent in Britain in the early part of the last century, and it means fabulous. That's what we aspire to. And it was a codified way that gay people could communicate with each other, I think especially men, because it was not always safe to talk about what you needed to talk about as a gay person out in the world. So I would say it's safe to say it's what we strive for is to make, gay words and art and lifestyle more and more safe, and to create and continue having a space for writers and readers of all ilks in the store. We have a lot of straight fans too, and we have a big general fiction section, but we have a huge gay fiction and especially gay young adult section. It's booming. It's really, really amazing to see.
That's great. Thank you for that. Melinda, I want to turn back to you. I want to congratulate you, first of all, on I'm hardly the first to congratulate you on the National Book Award for last night at the Telegraph Club, and on Scatter of Light. Scatter of Light is your new release. I wonder, would you say to the audience a little bit about Scatter of Light? Will you give us the elevator pitch and tell us a little bit about this book?
Sure. So A Scatter of Light is, on the cover it says companion to Last Night at the Telegraph Club. That's not a sequel. It means that it's set in the same world. It is set 60 years later than the Telegraph Club in 2013. It's about an 18-year-old girl named Aria Tong West during the summer between high school and college. She thinks she's going to be spending it with her friends on Martha's Vineyard, having a good time for the last time before she goes to college. But then something happens, and she is sent to live with her grandmother, artist Joan West, in Marin County, California, which is just north of San Francisco. So Aria gets to Marin, to her grandmother's house, and she immediately meets this woman named Steph, who is her grandmother's gardener. And Aria has always thought of herself as straight. It's never been really a question for her, but she realizes that she's quite attracted to Steph, and that's interesting. The only problem is Steph is not single. So that sets up some problems for Aria. And the book is really it's a coming of age novel. It's about Aria discovering that who she thought she was might not be who she will become. And it's also about art, because Joan's an artist and Aria discovers some things about art. It's about family connections. It's about the mistakes that you might make when you're young.
It's fabulous. And you shared that you wrote it before you wrote Last Night at the Telegraph Club.
I did.
Would you tell us a little bit about just sort of the process of creating these two works and how they've come to the world?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to be a little brief. So I started writing A Scatter of Light in 2013, and that is why it is set in 2013. But when it went out on submission in 2014, I couldn't sell it. It was basically rejected by all YA publishers.
Yeah.
And they were some of them were very uncomfortable with the sexuality in the book, because this is a coming of age novel. It is about first same-sex sexual experience. I thought it was important to have that in the story. And some of the responses were a bit homophobic. 2014 was a different time than today. I used to keep track of the number of LGBT YA books being published every year, and in 2013, there were only like 29 books that were LGBT YA books published. So it was a different time. Now, in 2022, we have hundreds of queer YA books being published. The world has really changed for queer YA. So in a way, I can understand why publishers were afraid of it back then. I went looking for an editor who was not afraid of lesbians. And I did find him, but even he could not buy the book back then. Instead, he bought a different book that I wrote called A Line in the Dark, which is a psychological thriller. And then I had the idea for Telegraph Club. And when he offered to buy Telegraph Club, he said, I'd also like to buy A Scatter of Light, which I thought was just over. You know, I thought that book had died. So I was very surprised. And I was like, yes, I still want to do it. But we agreed to do Telegraph Club first because at this time it was 2017. It was the beginning of the Trump administration. And even though Telegraph Club was set in the 1950s, it seemed to have some contemporary relevance. And we wanted to do that first. The only problem is I'm not a fast writer. So it took me like 3 years to write that book. But I did. And while I was writing Telegraph Club, I realized it was connected to A Scatter of Light. So when I went back to revise Scatter of Light after I finished Telegraph Club, this would be like in 2020, I could then bring those connections into the story. So I'm so happy that it is able to be published now in a time when this kind of book can be published. It's really wonderful. And yeah, I've been thrilled with the reception it's getting.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's getting great reception. We're going to put some of the reviews into the chat. Gosh, I mean, so many questions for both of you. I want to talk about genre. I want to talk about the whole award thing. But you know what I mean, you mentioned in telling that story though, Melinda, that you know how much the world has changed and how different you know the YA landscape was even just 9 years ago or something like that. All three of us were teenagers more than 9 years ago, and I want to, but I want to ask you both what books you might remember reading as children or as teenagers that were especially connected to you, especially moving for you, that you sort of came back to again and again. Melissa, I'll come to you first on this, and then Melinda, I'll go to you. But I mean, Melissa, when you were 15, what were the well-worn books that you had?
Well, I was cutting school a little bit too often, reading more adult books, I have to confess. But as young adult authors, especially I was interested in M.E. Kerr, who is not widely known today, but turns out to be a lesbian. And she wrote a lot of kind of issue-driven books and characters. And suddenly my brother's face is appearing on the screen.
He's shocked that you cut school. He's really upset. He's really shocked that you cut school.
Oh.
He should not be surprised by that. And the very first lesbian book that I ever read was a book called, it should be behind me somewhere, it's called Some Do by Jane DeLynn. And then later on in early college, I read Ruby Fruit Jungle and Southern Discomfort. A friend of mine and I ran to the bookstore, I think at the mall near Hampshire College, and she got Ruby Fruit Jungle and I got Southern Discomfort, and she started laughing immediately and I was totally jealous. So we switched after a while. So
I love it. Melinda, what about you? What books stick out in your mind?
Well, when I was like 12, 13, I think that's when I was reading more YA. One of the books that I mean, I didn't know of any lesbian or gay books at the time. I was not aware of any, although there were some. I mean, I think that Nancy Garden's Annie and My Mind was published in 1982, so that was available to find, but I did not find it. What I found were Madeleine L'Engle's books, and I just absolutely adored them. My favorite of hers was A Ring of Endless Light, and that was about a 15-year-old aspiring writer that I clearly identified with. spending the summer with her grandfather and having new relationships. And I have gone back to that book several times, and I realized at some point recently that it was extremely influential to me in terms of writing A Scatter of Light. Actually, there are some themes that are in a Ring of Endless Light that I go into as well. I'm very interested in the way Madeleine L'Engle has written about faith and family, and that's in here too. So I don't think I realized until much later how influential that was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense. To the audience watching live with us now or in future time watching the video, I want to remind you that Mighty Blaze is a volunteer organization, and Authors Love Bookstores exists to support independent bookstores. This week, Fabulosa Books, and you will note that there are a ton of links that are populating the comments for you to go and pick up any of these great books we're mentioning from Fabulosa. Definitely encourage you to do that from the bookshop.org site. If you're able to do that, please support the bookstore, support independent book selling, support Fabulosa, and drop questions and comments in the chat. Even if you're Melissa's brother, we want to hear from you. We want to hear. I'd love to talk genre a little bit. You know, a lot of the people who watch this show are themselves aspiring writers, and I think genre is one of those things that people can struggle to think about as a writer. Melinda, you, I think more than I think most writers, have moved between multiple genres. You've done sort of sci-fi and fantasy. You've done thriller. You clearly have a handle on romance. I wonder if you would just sort of say, for you, is genre something that you lead with? You know, you decide, well, this is how I'm going to write. This is what I'm going to write now. These are the rules. If it's going to be sci-fi, it has to satisfy these rules. I'm going to follow these steps, like a recipe. Or do you just sort of write what you want to write, and then later on your agent and your editor sort of tell you, like, hey, you wrote a thriller? I mean, how does it work for you?
I really am drawn by the concept first. I usually have a story idea or a character, and well, they're kind of interrelated. So I have the idea, and then I kind of notice what genre it is.
Yeah.
And I'm not limited by genre. Like, I think maybe some authors might have an idea and they're like, oh, I can't write this genre. I don't ever think that way. Maybe I should, but I don't. So when I have a story idea, I just notice what genre it is, and then I guess it kind of goes in that genre. I read all genres. I really like to read across genres, and I have favorites in every one. So I don't feel limited by that at all. I do like to take note of what the expectations are for a particular genre, not so that I can necessarily fulfill them, but so that I can have an idea of what the reader will expect going in.
Yeah.
Because a reader's expectations really do have an impact on the way they receive a book, the way they read it. And so I want to be aware of what they might be expecting so that I can either play to that or subvert it in whatever way. But I want to know what I'm doing in that.
And what is your relationship to being a young adult novelist? I mean, have you always known that you wanted to reach young adults as a writer? Are you simply drawn to writing these characters? Or sort of how has that worked for you?
Honestly, it was an accident. My first novel, Ash, is a lesbian retelling of Cinderella, and when I wrote it, it was my first novel. I knew nothing about young adult. I thought I was just writing a novel, and she was in her 20s at the end of the story. But when I started to send it out on submission, I realized it fit sort of into YA. I kind of did my market research, and it was sold as YA. And my publisher at the time simply had me lower her age, so she could only be 18 by the end of it. Nothing else changed. Like, nobody else's ages changed in the book. So that's interesting. But the main character could only be 18 by the end. And so then it was a 2-book deal. So I had to write another young adult novel. And then I just kind of kept selling YA. So it's very, I think once you're in an age category, it's somehow difficult to change out of it. So it's really been an accident
Yeah.
that I keep writing these books. And I mean, adolescence is a very interesting time to explore. I feel like I may have explored all of it at this point, so I may need to branch out a bit. But it's been an interesting place to write for sure.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, certainly many adults read YA, but and myself included, but I wonder if you have found it all limiting in terms of the audience that you reach, and if you think that in the future you will sort of write, adult books.
You know what is limiting is that, well, the main character can't be over 18, so that's a limit. But other than that, what's I find the most limiting about it is adults' perceptions of young adult. Like adults who don't typically read YA have beliefs about what YA is, and often those beliefs are incorrect. They're kind of prejudiced. I have to say, I think that writing YA for so long has really shown me how much our culture devalues teenagers. It's fascinating and also kind of horrible because I've met so many teens in the last decade doing this, and speaking to teens has been so wonderful. They're great people. They're just younger than a lot of us.
Right.
So I find that is really the most limiting aspect of it. And if I feel the need to write about older people, then I will, because I'm not constrained by genre.
Right. Right. Um, Melissa, I wonder if you would talk a little bit about genre, sort of from the book selling side. I mean, you mentioned that there's a large YA section at Fabulosa. I don't think that YA sections were so large, 15 years ago. I wonder if you would just sort of say a little bit about that from the I guess, the market side of things, as well as genre in general, and sort of, if you've seen shifts over your time as a bookseller in terms of what gets marketed as what, and sort of what's popular and what's respectable and sort of all that stuff.
Well, back in the early days in the 80s, young adult wasn't as huge a deal, by far a huge a deal as it is now. And we have currently at Fabulosa more than a full case of LGBT young adult material. We have a much smaller section of general LGBT. I struggle not to say regular LGBT,
Right.
or excuse me, regular young adult fiction. But there is a lot of crossover, and I think some of the most exciting publishing seems to be happening in the LGBT young adult area. And I never had that as a kid, that kind of range. And we now have some books with non-binary characters. We have some trans characters, although I'm sure that could be better developed. And one of the most powerful things that I experience in working in a gay bookstore in 2022 is having parents with their children on a trip from Texas or somewhere like that come to the bookstore. I mean, it brings tears to your eyes to see the level of support for their kids. And, they have free run of the store and, buy big stacks of books from the young adult section or wherever, and they're supported, and they overstuff their suitcases and manage to get back to wherever they came from. But it's a huge commitment to have that material available for those kids, because they need it the most, in my view. And, it's one thing to grow up in San Francisco. It's another thing to grow up, in Oklahoma or Texas or wherever. So we're very sensitive to that. And in terms of genre fiction, one of our best-selling areas is the science fiction and fantasy section. it's not necessarily my area that I'm most knowledgeable about. I know lots and lots of titles and authors, but I, haven't read that much myself. But people love it, and I think right now, especially, people need an escape, and people need comfort, and I think that's something that the young adult section is representing to people. There's romance. Generally, things end on a good, positive note, and we can be safe in that. And with all of the scary things going on in the real world right now, some of us need more fantasy and dragons and other worlds, and that's a fun thing for them. And some of us need something more reality based, or I'm not sure if that's the right word, but the here and now basis. And I think bookstores are trying to pivot to meet all of those needs. And I think it really does show up in sales.
Yeah.
So that makes us all the more happy to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Melinda, one word that's come up a couple of times as we've been talking about these books, and I think is a characteristic of your books, is romance. And I wonder if you would say a little bit. I mean, I'm a young adult writer as well, and I certainly the expectation is the young adult novel will offer some, a love interest and some element of romance most of the time, and it's actually deceptively difficult to really build that in an effective, compelling, believable way, and you do it very well. So I guess what I'm just going to ask on behalf of all of the viewers and also myself is, what's the secret? What is the secret to sort of building good, to making it to build a good romance, rather than just sort of, saying, oh, these two people are together.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I don't know that there's a secret. I honestly don't think of any of my books as romances. I think of, they're certainly all coming of age novels, which the reason I don't think of them as romances is because the romantic relationship in a book, they don't all have one, first of all. And if there is one, that is not necessarily the main story for the character.
Right.
The character's primary story is generally about discovering their identity. That's the center of a young adult coming of age novel, right? So the love story certainly intertwines with it, but I don't think it is ever the central core of the story. So maybe that's the secret. I mean, I don't ever set out to write that. And for example, in Last Night at the Telegraph Club, which many people read as a romance, they may be surprised to know that in the first draft there was no romance. The main characters were just friends, because I thought it was too unrealistic for Lily, the main character, to meet her first lesbian and also fall in love with her. That never happens in reality, never. So I didn't do that in the first draft, but when I went back to revise it, I realized that Lily and Kath were really into each other, and it would probably make a better book if I brought that out and made that a big part of the novel. So I did. But it was really the characters showing me that they were interested in each other. That's what brought that story out for me. So I really try to allow the characters to drive that kind of relationship. I always try to think about what they're feeling, and I don't try to force anything. And I feel that it is important for me to note that A Scatter of Light is not a romance. It is not a romance. So I don't want anyone to be disappointed when they read this book. It's very sexy, definitely sexy, but it is not a romance. So I just want to be clear about that. Just because I know people get very disappointed.
You're very disappointed. And I guess would it be accurate that what you're saying is that for it to be a romance, the romantic relationship and the sort of the accomplishment of that relationship has to be sort of the center of the book, or sort of the point of the book.
That's what I think. But I also follow and I read. I follow a lot of romance writers, like capital R romance, because I think that romance, the genre, is incredibly fascinating, and I just really admire the way these writers from Business Point do their work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just very aware that a romance novel requires a happily ever after,
Mm-hmm.
and I typically don't write that. So I know that people who don't read a lot of genre romance may see my novels as romantic or as romance, but people who read genre romance probably would not. So that's the distinction, really. I just don't want to disappoint people who are looking for like a happy, fun, happily ever after romance. That's not the kind of stuff I write. But I would definitely say that Telegraph Club is certainly a love story that is very romantic and does have a happily ever after ending, in my opinion. And also my novel Ash, which is a retelling of Cinderella, very much happily ever after. I mean, it's a fairy tale, so just about lesbians.
That's great. I want to talk a little bit about, as I said, a lot of the people who watch this are themselves writers, and I want to talk a little bit about publishing and publishing success. And Melinda, I know I read, and of course now I'm not going to be able to quite recall where I read it, but that you had written somewhere that one of your works was in many ways you coming to terms with your feelings about the publishing industry. I think you had sort of said that. One of your things. You are. Oh, there we go. Yes. Yeah, that's often how I feel about publishing as well. Yeah, that's good. However, you are indeed a National Book Award winner, and so a couple questions about that. First of all, when you were writing Telegraph Club, which was what won the National Book Award and the print, and a number of other awards. I guess my question is, like, did you know? I mean, was the experience of writing that book different from writing your other 6 books? Did you feel like you were tapping into something different? Did you feel like you were doing something different? Or is it just that you did the same thing and it sort of happened to click with the publishing world, right place, right time, right readers, etc.? I mean, what was it like?
Kind of all of it. Like when I started writing Telegraph Club, I had never written a historical novel before, so I knew nothing about the 1950s, and I had to do a ton of research. And for a good year and a half, I mean, I thought it was terrible. I was like, this is going to be so bad. This is going to be the worst thing I've ever written. It's so bad. But at some point during the revision process, I started to think I was doing okay, and it was different. By the time I got to copy edits, which is the very last stage of editorial, that's when the copy editor goes in, finds all your little grammatical mistakes. By the time I got there, I thought to myself, I did a good job with this book. I really did feel like I had done something well. And that does not normally happen. Like normally when I get to the end and it's going to copy editor, I'm like, oh my God, it's still bad. But this time I really thought it was good. I don't know why. I really did think it was good. And I treasure that feeling because I don't know when it will ever come again.
And then tell us about winning the National Book Award. I mean, just tell us, feed our literary fantasies. I mean, what happens? You just get a phone call in the middle of the night, or sort of how does it go down?
No, so I had no idea. Well, with the National Book Award, they do this thing that's like a reality show where they like cut people from the list. So they announced the long list, which is like 10 books in each category first, and I had no idea that was being announced. I didn't even really consider that it was a possibility for me, because who goes around thinking I'm going to win the National Book Award? Like, this is not a thing you think. So my editor called me one morning and he was like, congratulations. And I was like, thanks. Did not know what he was talking about. And we were talking for like a good minute, and he was like, "You have no idea what I'm talking about." I was like, "Oh, what happened?" So that was how I learned that I was on the long list, um, which was a great way to learn. Totally great, no pressure at all. But then I realized they were going to cut off half of those people to make a short list like a month later, and then I got stressed. And I thought I also would not know until the day of the short list was announced. But actually, they left a voicemail on my phone the night before they announced it. I didn't hear the call at all. I don't know. I don't know what I was doing. I was in a different room. And then I found my phone later, and there was a message, and it was like a minute long. So I was like, what is this area code 212 number? I played it, and I was in my kitchen, and I literally started screaming. I was like, oh my God, it was amazing. Yes. It was totally amazing. And then, so that was great. And then meeting the other finalists, we only got to meet online because it was the pandemic. I was in this room here for the award ceremony, which was virtual. I was sitting in this chair. So, I'm sad that I missed a beautiful, fancy publishing dinner, but I was also nauseated for like 2 days before the award. So probably I wouldn't have been able to eat anything. So I probably didn't miss any. And it was just an incredibly surreal experience. I mean, they told us to write a speech. So I wrote one, and I wrote it the day of the awards, and I practiced it like the day of the awards. And then it happened, and I did it. I still can't really remember it. It was really amazing. And it was amazing. And ever since then, I've been very, very busy. So I'm very happy they're going to announce new winners like in 2 weeks. And the new winner in the Young People's Literature category can take all my events.
Well, first of all, thank you for affirming that it's an amazing experience. It was a bummer if you were like, it wasn't that great. So that's fabulous. Also, speaking of events, I should let people know that I believe you're the keynote this weekend at Boston Book Festival. Is that correct?
I am, yeah, this weekend, Saturday, in person in Copley.
In person, live and in person. So especially those of us who are in the Boston area, be there. Melissa, Melinda sort of talked about how she did have a feeling about Telegraph Club, that it was something special, something she had done well. One question I'd like to ask booksellers, especially veteran booksellers such as yourself, who have seen a lot sort of come and go, is sort of a two-part question about literary success. First, do you know, when books are rolling out, do you know, what are going to be the best sellers? What are going to be the award winners? Do you have a nose for it? Or are you as surprised as everybody? And second, two-part question, second part, do you affect it? Are you shaping tastes? Are you steering readers? Or are you just kind of along for the ride with the rest of us?
Well, I don't think we can claim to, little old Fabulosa Books can't claim to be affecting it on a national level, but maybe, who knows, maybe we have more power than we realize. But I will say, as soon as I opened the box and saw Telegraph Club, I knew that, it takes place in San Francisco. It's the 50s. It was obviously telling a story that had never been told before from a perspective that, I'm sure somebody has written Asian love story from a lesbian perspective from the 50s or from history. We just haven't found them yet, besides Melinda's work. But I knew as soon as I opened the box that this was going to be really interesting. In fact, I resisted reading it for a while because I knew that it was going to be really good, and I wanted to wait for the perfect moment. And then, of course, I read it, and I was just like, why did I wait so long to read this? But now it's over. So what do I do now? That's always the problem. And so I do think that we help shape literary taste on a local level we do choose to push certain books, things that have affected us, somebody was in the store the other day looking for a romance that they wanted to read with their girlfriend. And, you know, I'm shoving Last Night at the Telegraph Club, but you'll be happy to know that they'd already read it.
Oh,
But you do that. That's just part of what you do. You know, and then what also happens, because we can't know everything, is we have to be able to recognize the wave of interest when it's happening, and hopefully before it completely crests. So we might not have known about Last Night at the Telegraph Club, but we have to listen to our customers. And that's a huge part of success, in my view, because we can't know everything. And just because we like a book doesn't mean everybody likes a book. Just because I like a book doesn't mean you'll like a book. However, there are certain books that you know will translate above usual differences. I don't usually read romances per se. I don't usually read young adult books per se. However, I love coming of age novels, and I love the aspiration of them, and it kind of keeps you young in a sense. And I want to keep aspiring in my life, even though I'm really old now, you know, comparatively. You know, I also wish that I was 30 working on Castro Street at a gay bookstore. Yeah. Being married in 60 is different. So anyway, I do think that we have to listen, and I think that we have to communicate, and we have to do both at the same time. And that's part of the fun, you know, because we can't only be dictating the conversation. Otherwise, it gets really boring, and our tastes would, you know, become some kind of insular thing. And that's not really effective book selling, in my view.
Yeah. In a moment, speaking of book selling, in a moment we're going to come to our book recommendations. But Melinda, I do have one more question for you. You know, a few minutes ago, Melissa talked about the you know, the individual from Texas who visits the store, and you know, sort of what the store means, what the books mean to that individual and their family. It made me wonder, do you often hear from your readers in terms of what your books mean to them? And what is that experience like for you?
Oh yeah, I've heard from readers for a long time now. So my first book came out in 2009, and what I love is that I've had at least 2 readers tell me that they met their girlfriends or their partners while they read Ash together, which was my first novel. So that I actually think one of them may have gotten a divorce since then, but they weren't reading Ash. See, they should have just kept reading it together. Right. So it's really been wonderful to hear from readers. I get email from teens who find my books and say that they've helped them discover who they are, that they're queer. It's helped them come out to their parents, or it's helped them to feel better about themselves in situations where they can't come out to their parents. You know, so that's been really nice. I get emails from older people who are like, I wish I'd had your book when I was, you know, a teenager. And it would have helped me so much to figure things out. And I'm like, yeah, me too. Yeah. I wish I'd had them too. So the reader mail has been really wonderful. And now I get it everywhere. You know, they don't just email now. They're on all social media. So it's a whole new world of reader feedback, which is incredible.
It is incredible. Yeah. I mean, with my own writing, I found that sort of that type of feedback is just, I mean, there's no way to describe how moving that can be. Mm-hmm. And I always tell people, if you read a book that you love, let the author know, you know, if you can.
That's great. It's lovely to hear. It's always so nice to hear that.
So moving.
Yeah.
Well, we, believe it or not, are starting to run down on time, and we need to sell some books. So I want to remind the viewers, both those of you with us now and those of us in future time, that there is only one place you should be buying books today, and that is online from Fabulosa, or in person if you happen to be in San Francisco. But we are supporting Fabulosa Books, and Melissa, you are the professional, so I'm going to go to you first and then to Melinda. But Melissa, What are you reading now? What are you excited about? What do you want to bring people's attention?
I just started this Diary of a Misfit by Casey Parks, and it's really an interesting story and kind of heartrending, as memoirs can be sometimes, about her coming out in a Southern, very conservative family, and her getting, hellfire from her mother. And then her grandmother comes in to her defense out of the blue and says, by the way, there was a very interesting person that lived down the street from me when I was growing up. And they were a woman living as a man. And, that's part of the mystery of the book. Is it's a memoir and a mystery. And the grandmother's imploring of her to find out more about what happened to this person. So I really recommend that. Next on my reading list is actually something that Melinda recommended to me, which is Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. And I haven't cracked that yet, but it looks really good, and we have been selling it really well. So,
yeah, Yerba Buena is a love story. It's an adult novel. Nina has written a lot of YA books. She also writes picture books, and Yerba Buena is about two women who, in their 20s, who meet in LA, and their relationship ups and downs over several years. It's so beautiful. I really loved it so much. And there are actually a lot of parallels with some things that happen in A Scatter of Light, which was also fascinating to see, because Nina and I, we know each other, but we did not read our books, each other's books while we were writing. So it's really interesting to see those in my eye anyway.
Fascinating. Melinda, what about you? What are you excited about these days?
Well, let me tell you, I have just started this Lavender House by Lev A.C. Rosen, which is it's an adult mystery set in San Francisco in the 1950s. It is queer. It's kind of, it has that really great San Francisco noir feel. And it's about this group of queer people who live together in a house called Lavender House. And I think it's in Mill Valley, actually. And this detective, this hard-bitten San Francisco detective who is gay and has been thrown out of establishments such as the Black Cat, is hired to go up there and investigate a murder involving a perfume heiress, I think. It's so interesting, and the feel of it is so 1950s noir. I'm really loving it so far. And if you liked Telegraph Club, I think that this is a great book to continue in that 1950s San Francisco vibe.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, audience members, you know what to do. If you are able, go pick up copies of these books and others from Fabulosa Books. Also, note to the audience, Authors Love Bookstores is drawing close to our goal of visiting independent booksellers in all 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and DC, plus Canada and the UK. We are down to 5 states, and if you have a beloved independent bookstore in any of these states, please reach out to us at Mighty Blaze on social media, mightyblaze@gmail.com. The states are Hawaii, Indiana, Louisiana, Maryland, and Nebraska.
wow.
So those are the 5 outstanding states we want to reach. So hit us up if there's a beloved indie bookstore there. Melissa, we always go out at the end on a question to the bookseller, and the question is this. Success in independent bookselling is part luck, part hard work, and part what else?
Originally, I was going to say moxie, because that's definitely part of, you have to try things, be creative, and use your wits, what you have, to determine if something's successful or not successful, and, learn to pivot. But you also need community. And we're lucky to be on Castro Street with a stream of tourists and regulars coming by, LGBT or not. and we count on them, and we love them, and they seem to love us. And it wouldn't be the same without this sense of community. So there you go.
That's great. That would have been a fabulous answer. Thank you so much. That's really, really great. It has been such a pleasure speaking to the two of you. Thank you both so much for joining me. Melissa, I hope to visit the store in person at some point.
Please do.
Melinda, congratulations once again on National Book Award, and congratulations on Scatter of Light.
Thank you.
Audience members, pick up these and others at Fabulosa through the many, many links we've sprinkled through the comments. Come back next week. Join us again for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. And until then, stay well and keep reading.
Thank you so much.